I think what I was saying the same thing. I was saying that even though there's a huge consensus in favor of global warming, that if you have a few scientists who still disagree, like Willie, for example, then those opinions can be taken by a government and used for political purposes.
Yeah, that's what I mean, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
I also think that people cannot expect the impossible from science. Science cannot predict the unpredictable. And we have many, many examples of surprises in the environment where even scientists were not capable of anticipating what was happening. I think for biology, one of the major examples is the invading species problem. Over the last 50 years, many new species have arrived all over the world. Our harbors all over the planet are now similar. They have the same plants and animals everywhere because they've been transported by ships. And we have, even in quite buffered systems, we talked about resilience just a few minutes ago, in quite buffered systems, at least systems that we thought were resilient, they have been invaded time and time again by species who sometimes became very dominant. A very good example in my own country is the Japanese oyster. We had no oysters there since 100 years because they were all fished away, and to waste as well. And now, at some stage, this Japanese oyster arrived, and immediately it conquered the whole ecosystem. And they are now present in banks which cover tens and hundreds of square kilometers, whereas a few years ago there were none. So we have also many other examples of that. And science has not been able to predict that that would happen, and can only, of course, study the consequences of that. I think the other thing is that we are only a very minor voice, as I said already, in political discussions. And I have the example in Europe of how the fisheries decisions are being made. We have a very large body of scientists in ICES, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, of which also the United States and Canada are members. And they provide the European Commission with advice on how many fish you can catch each year. For all the fish species, you have working groups who spend weeks on end to calculate the exact number. And then in 2 days' time at the Commission, these figures are completely reworked. And the decision in the end is purely political. It has very little to do with science. And if I would be a scientist working for the ICES, I would be extremely frustrated by that. But of course, it's society. We are only part of society. So in overall, I would say, are we doing a good job in trying to, as Carl explained, in trying to get a proper management, proper governance, proper protection, and perhaps also sustainable exploitation of the oceans? I think probably not. The thing is also, we are a professional society, as you also said. We have our own set of rules. The peer review, the way we get our grants, our careers as well. As a scientist, you don't make a career by going to the press and going to explain to your local senator how well or how bad the environment is doing. As a scientist, you make a career because you have good papers. So it's an extremely closed world in some way. And I think to break out of that closed world requires courage from scientists and also conviction from scientists. People need to feel that they have to do that, and then it's not really helpful for their careers, and sometimes it's even contrary to their career opportunities. So I think this closed world is a kind of a handicap for science to play the role that it could play, and we tend to ignore a little bit also the questions from society. Only when there's money attached to those questions, we start to do research on that. And I think that's also some of the negative points about science. On the positive side, I think what I have seen in Europe and also worldwide is that we network now a lot. And we have large communities of scientists addressing important problems. I'm personally involved in the Census of Marine Life, which started as a crazy idea 10 years ago, and now is a worldwide exercise of scientists. And I think the main purpose of the census as well, in the end, is to go for ocean conservation. And so I think this is an example of where scientists have been able to do a positive thing which will be useful for society.
Okay, before we go to Jean-Yves Perrot, Carl, were there any questions you have for them, anything that's stimulated by your discussion that you want to respond to?
Maybe picking up on this question of societal choices and how we sort of use science. I think it is striking that we've never had a bigger, larger body of science, yet we seem to apply it in a very patchy way. I mean, there are often quite poor implementation of what seems to be perfectly good science. And one have to ask oneself then, why is it that our society chooses to do this? Is it because there are such economic issues at stake, such a short-term perspective on how we're managing resources that we would gladly push aside good science just for the fact that we believe we'd be better off resolving a crisis in the moment? And maybe there's a lesson there then. If that is the way humans behave, we probably then have to change our way of organizing society. So I think one of the questions to the audience will be, what can we do to have a stronger use of science, and how can it be implemented in such a way that it really does serve humankind over a longer period of time, and perhaps not just in the short term?
I could just respond. I mean, I do think this is changing, but scientists traditionally have been an incredibly insular group, just sort of interested in talking to other scientists. And so in our institutions of higher education, we train young people to be professors. Now there's nothing wrong with training young people to be professors, but to only train young people to be professors is crazy. We need to train young people to be in government, making policy in various ministries, and working in NGOs, which are really at the interface between the public and the scientific community. And so, but to train them properly, they need to know more than just natural science. I do think things really are changing. I also think the incentive structures in universities are changing in such a way that it's not just the citation index of your papers that counts in your promotion, but whether you're actually making a difference to the planet. So I do think things are changing. They need to change faster, but I'm actually reasonably optimistic that science can have a more important role, but we can only have a more important role if we recognize that we shouldn't be making the policy decisions. We're part of the discussion, and we have to understand the economic and political constraints that enter into those decisions. And it's not just a question of reading the newspaper, it's a question of really understanding the underlying principles that govern psychology, economics, anthropology, policy, government, etc. And so if we remember that we're part of the equation and not all of the equation, and we're willing to learn something about those other parts of the equation, I think we can be much more effective.
Okay, thank you. We were going to, at this point, go to Jean-Yves Perrot, who's the president and CEO of Ifremer, who's been having a lot of trouble with the translation machine. It's not a plot on behalf of English-speaking people. I do apologize, but okay.